Hey you guys, it's Peter and welcome to my channel, Peter Likes Books. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my Diverseathon TBR in a second, but it has been a very emotional day for me, all centered around the Diverseathon, and I kind of want to explain that because for me, what has happened in just literally the last 2 or 3 hours I think has educated me really on the importance of Diverseathon, at least for my experience. Okay, so I have been trying to figure out what books I wanted to read to have like the perfect Diverseathon TBR for me. Like I wanted to read a book from this and a book from that and a book from, I really wanted to educate myself. I wanted to read from a lot of different perspectives, and that was just kind of my goal. I also kind of wanted to keep it fiction, maybe one memoir, but I really wanted to read a lot of fiction because a lot of people are talking about fiction. So, I had talked to Readathon, and he reads, and he and I had chosen last month that for this month we were going to buddy read Underground Railroad by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Am I pronouncing her name right? I hope so. So anyway, we had talked about it, and we're going to read that next week for the Diverseathon. And he's also doing Hispanic Heritage Month. So I don't know that he's doing it, but I'm doing it. So I thought, well, I'll read that during that because I'm going to listen. I have already bought it on Audible, so I was going to listen to it on Audible. So then I was like, okay, I don't want to have like 18 books I'm going to read for Diverseathon, so I just want to have a couple. And so several people had recommended to me to read a book by Sherman Alexie, and then somebody had recommended for me to read several Venezuelan authors because my husband's from Venezuela. I have on my Venezuela SOS shirt today, which I'll explain in a second. And then several people had recommended for me to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And so those were the books that I was going to get. And my plan was to go to the library and get these books. They're pretty well-known books. I thought they have to be at the library. So that was my plan. The Venezuelan books that were recommended to me are all award-winning novels that have been translated into English. I had a list of them. And so I was all excited about it. I thought this will be no-brainer. I won't have to go and spend $60 on books right now that I'm going to read in a week. And if I love any of them, I'll go buy copies of them so I have them. Okay, so I go to the library and I'm like looking up. I have like 5 Venezuelan authors, and I'm like looking all through the fiction for these Venezuelan authors, and there's none of them, okay? So I'm sitting there, and this woman's putting up books in the carts, and I said, hey, do you know of any, like, famous Venezuelan authors that, like, maybe, she's like, well, anything that you would find would be mixing them with the fiction. I was like, okay. So then I go to the information desk, and the woman was so helpful to me, and she was like, I explained to her what I wanted, and I was explaining to her that I was doing it for the Diverseathon, and so anyway, she was like, well, I don't know that I know any Venezuelan authors. And I was like, okay, how about any just Latino authors that are prominent or that you know of, whatever. And I thought, honestly, that she might like have a sheet that she would give me or, 10 names or something like that. And so they were so helpful, you guys. But literally, they gave me 3 names, okay? And none of them were things that I really wanted to read. I mean, like, it was like an Isabel Allende book, and then it was, the other book was, I have his name written down, you guys. I'm going to mispronounce it. It's Hajuelos, Oscar Hajuelos. Okay, so anyway, and he had written this book about Mark Twain going to Cuba, and just, I was like, this is not, I'm like wanting to read books where there's like identification of marginalized characters. That's what I want to read. So, if that makes sense. So anyway, I started getting kind of frustrated, and then what I realized was you're experiencing what everybody else is experiencing. Like, you can't find identification of these characters that you're looking for in books. So imagine if it wasn't you doing this for Diverseathon, but if this was your life, like if you were Latino looking for Latino characters in books and you couldn't find them. Like, I was just like, I don't know, like, and then I specifically didn't want to read young adult for this, because I read so much young adult that I kind of wanted to steer away from young adult for this. So, yeah, so that happened, and then so what happened was I was looking for the autobiography of Malcolm X, I looked it up, and they didn't have it, and I was like, are you kidding me? And they didn't have it at the main library either, and I was like, this is like a really important book, like that was one of my mom's all-time favorite books, you know, it's like taught in college classes, and I was like, I cannot believe this. So anyway, not just an important book, but like one of the most important like memoirs of all time. So what I did was I just started going to like the cultural section where it had like all these cultural books from like teenagers to anything. And I just started going through and getting different books that were different cultural things, which I'll talk about in a second. And they're all nonfiction. And so I had to go check these books out, you guys. And I'm standing at the counter with this one book, which you'll see in a second. And the librarian behind the counter was African American, and I was like embarrassed to like have this book. Like I kept on like covering it up. Like it was so embarrassing to me. And what was so interesting going through these books was that like there were books that were called like white shame, white guilt, things like that. And I thought, like, I'm sitting there in this aisle and I'm like, okay, now do you understand how these statements you had made prior were like offensive without you even realizing it? Okay. So then I got in the car thinking about this Adichie book, Underground Railroad, and something else. And so I looked her up because I wanted to make sure I pronounced her name right. And this interview came up. And so I started watching this interview with her. And she's so humble and just eloquent, but very simply eloquent in how she says things. And so this woman halfway through the interview refers to Beyonce using part of her TED Talks speech in some song of hers. And I love Beyonce, but I'm not a super fan. So anyway, so I went to this TED Talks thing, you guys, and I started watching Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talks, okay? Which is called The Danger of a Single Story. I mean, this is almost like a God thing that this happened to me today, honest to God. So I'm watching this TED Talks thing, and she's talking about how when she was growing up, her mom said she started reading when she was 2, but really it was more like 4, she thinks. And that she read all American and British children's literature. So when she started writing, what she wrote were she wrote children's books with characters with blonde hair and blue eyes because that's what she saw in books. She didn't see books about African characters in it. She didn't see books that had, as she says, characters with chocolate skin and kinky hair that won't stay in braids. And that's exactly what she says. And so it took her a while to realize, until she was introduced to African authors, that her story was important too. And so she starts talking about how, like, when she came to the United States and, like, what her roommate thought, like, she said, you know, like, can I listen to some of your tribal music? And she laughs and she says, like, I started playing Mariah Carey. And, you know, it was just like this misnomer of, like, what her culture was about. And I started thinking about this with my own in-laws because they're all Venezuelan. And if you're in the United States, if you're in another country, you probably do know what's going on in Venezuela, but our news is edited in the United States right now, you guys. And so most people in the United States do not know that there is basically a civil war going on in Venezuela. None of my in-laws were able to work, find food. I mean, it is horrible there right now, you guys. Terrifying for them. And a lot of them are seeking refuge in the United States for political asylum. And Venezuela is just one story. There are many stories like this, you know, throughout the world. But those are two different stories. The Venezuela that you see if you're in the United States is Miss Venezuela at the, you know, Miss Universe pageant and, you know, gorgeous beaches and, you know, 100 Years of Solitude, things like that. So it's interesting to me, this whole idea of a danger of one story. And she talks about the vulnerability of children to only hear one story. And I was like, oh my God, I so get it now. And then she goes in this whole thing and she talks about the power of the United States. And so in the United States, we have such a power to have many, many, many stories be published through books, TV, movies, whatever, that if you are from outside the United States, you don't just have one view of American culture. You have many views of American culture, but our view is ignorant of the rest of the world. And she talks in there about how, like, she wrote a story when she was in college, and her professor said it wasn't authentically African because, you know, her characters drove cars and were middle class. And she's like, but that She's like, I don't even know what authentically African is. I'm going to link this TED Talks below, you guys. I think it's so important in the whole context of Diverseathon and talking about the value of diverse characters, the importance of having more than one story so that we are seen everywhere. And I want to explain this first with the first book I got. So my coming out experience was very easy. My parents are very liberal, were very liberal minded. It was a non-issue. They accepted me with love. But I know that is not the experience of many, many LGBTQ people out there. I know that, okay? I have a lot of friends that have gone through horrible experiences. I've read the stories. But I wanted to be more fully educated. So I got this book called Crisis. 40 stories revealing the personal, social, and religious pain and trauma of growing up gay in America. And it's all these different stories. And stories included by Nate Berkus, Bishop Gene Robinson, Richard Chamberlain. Okay, you guys, I'm so excited about reading this book because I was like, this is not my experience. And here they all are on the back. And I thought, here are 40 different versions of my story told differently. Not one story, 40 different stories. And so I thought that was really vital and important to me, seeing that my story is not the same as somebody else's story. Even though we have a unique story, if I'm sitting across from Nate Berkus, which I would love, just let's get that in there, like his story is completely different than mine, and I can't assume that we have the same story. And we have to talk to each other in teachable, appropriate ways, so that we don't stay in ignorance and hatred. Does that make sense? I can't assume that, his experience, if I say, hey, let's just go to a gay bar, I don't know that he's ever been to a gay bar before. That might be terrifying to him, And so I think it's really, 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 really important that we see different versions of our own story. Okay, so I got that. And then I got Dear Zari, The Secret Lives of the Women of Afghanistan. And it's different stories of women, and it says in here, allows the women to tell their stories in their own words, from the child bride given as payment to end a family feud, to a life spent in a dark, dusty room weaving carpets, from a young girl being brought up as a boy to a woman living as a widow shunned by society. I don't know anything about the Afghan culture, but I sure as shit know that as Americans, and I'm just speaking for the United States, I think the majority of people, if we saw that walk into a room, we would be terrified and look down on it without understanding anything behind it. So I refuse to remain ignorant anymore, and I want to learn. So the next thing I got, because so many people have recommended this book to me, because I loved Sherman Alexie's, the autobiography or whatever. So anyway, The Lone Ranger and Tano Fist Fight in Heaven is one of his adult novels. And the other book I read was The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. I loved it. It was his YA novel, so I'm excited to read this. And then I got, are you ready? Because I love her now, Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And this one and Underground Railroad I am super, super excited about reading. And then I got Antonio's Gun and Delfino's Dream, the true tales of Mexican migration. And it's so interesting, you guys. I was flipping through it in the library, and it's what really happens when they come here. And you guys, I have in-laws that are immigrants. I have family and friends that are immigrants, and I don't know that I really understand what it must feel like to come here and leave everything behind. I do understand the sadness of that because I see it, and I see that they can't see their families, but I don't know that I really truly understand. I don't truly understand it. I mean, I can't make that statement. I truly do not understand anything about it. And so I'm really, really excited about reading this. I was kind of surprised that I came across it. And it goes in and it tells about where they came from and how they start here and how they get to different parts of the United States and things like that. Now, the next book that I got, you guys, I thought was a joke when I first found it, and I was like, oh no. And this is the one that I was embarrassed to have at the counter. And it's called Dear White People, A Guide to Interracial Harmony in Post-Racial America by Justin Simeon. Did you see the cover? Okay. So I opened this book thinking it was a joke, and I thought, is this like a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing? You guys, it has activities in here. It says things like, please stop insisting that you're practically black, or how much mileage do you get when using a black card, or how you have friends that are black, things like that. And then it has this test that you take, and it says, it's all kind of done kind of funny, but it's very serious. It's like, are you a post-racist? And so it has these questions, and I thought this question was really interesting. Why do black kids in predominantly white middle schools tend to sit together in the cafeteria? At that age, or A, at that age, where else will they be able to practice rap battling? B, because as much as black people like to point the finger at society, they are as responsible for segregation as anybody else. C, they probably share common cultural interests. And D, identifying with a particular group is a necessary survival tactic. When confronted with the majority culture's often misguided perception of your race and ethnicity, finding others who share that burden can be a comforting respite, particularly during these developmental years. And it's obviously D. And so, like, you guys, the whole book is like that. It's like so interesting. And it's like, when I was reading it, I just kind of sat there and I was like, you are so closed-minded, Peter, without even realizing that you're closed-minded, you know? And just the fact that I'm, like, afraid to take this book up to the counter is ridiculous. So I am so excited about Diverseathon, you guys. I'm so excited to educate myself and remain teachable and stop being ignorant and hide behind what is privilege. I mean, it is. So, and I have to admit that to be able to grow and move on. So I'm so excited about this. I'm excited to hear what books you guys are reading. Yeah, let's get started on Diverseathon, you guys. And that's it. If you want to follow all my stuff to see what I'm doing with that, I would love it. And I will talk to you later. Bye.